Hey, thank you, Masha. Very nice to be back here at Biola. And I need to really say thank you to everyone at Biola, especially the SMU team, the Student Missionary Union. The great emphasis that you guys put on missions at this school. You can feel it on this campus. My daughter, Annabelle, is in her 4th year at Biola. And every time we come here to visit, I'm tremendously impressed with all the signs that are in front of the dining hall trying to recruit people to go on mission trips. When you go into any of your lobbies in the dormitories, there's posters on the wall recruiting people for mission trips. Whenever you go into the gym, there's posters outside about mission trips and tables for people to sign up. So thank you for the huge emphasis that Biola puts on missions. And it's been like that at Biola for over 50 years. In fact, Biola had that reputation before I came here in the 80s. My wife was she wasn't my wife at the time, but my wife was a high school student in San Diego, Christian High in San Diego at David Jeremiah's church. And she was telling her friends that she was thinking of going to college at Biola. And her friend said, "Laura, don't go to Biola. You're going to end up marrying a missionary and moving to Africa." And she said, "Well, that will never happen." I want to introduce 15 people that are here today, and I'm going to ask them to stand and remain standing because they're an important part of the talk that I'm giving this morning or this afternoon. I'm going to start with my parents, Jack and El Chinchen, if you'll stand. They're the founders. Stay standing. They're the founders of the mission that I run in Africa. They've been in Africa, Liberia, Uganda, and Malawi for over 40 years, since 1970. I'm going to ask my wife to stand, the mother of 5 children. Laura, and we have 3 younger kids here, Levi, Bess, Vandell, if you'll stand. And actually 4 out of my 5 kids, Annabelle, if you'll stand as well. She's a 4th year student here. And her cousin, Spencer Chinchen, is he here yet? Spencer Chinchen, if you'll stand up. He's also in his 4th year. And then Spencer's parents, Palmer and Veronica Chinchen, if they'll stand. Palmer, my twin brother, we're identical twins. We roomed together for 3 years at Biola. And he's the pastor of the Grove Church in Phoenix. He's also an author, the author of the book, The Barefoot Tribe. He spoke yesterday. And then I'm going to ask one of our students from African Bible College, Humphreys, if you'll stand up, Mahoa. Humphreys is from Malawi. He's only been in America for 8 months. He plays on the soccer team at Masters. Somehow they got a hold of him before I could send him to Biola. He was a student of mine for 2 years in Malawi. First season in GSAC Player of the Year. Scored 14 goals in 16 games. And then I'm going to have 2 career missionaries stand up. Roger and Barbara Spear worked for our African Bible colleges in Liberia back in the 1980s. Roger, if you'll turn around, Roger is famous because he's the only person that I know personally that's been spit in the eye by a spitting cobra and was blinded in his right eye. Luckily, he gained his sight a few weeks later. And then 2 more people I'm going to have stand up, Nick and Nate Hughes. If you guys will stand up. 2 more identical twins. These guys played football at Azusa. They were on the football team at Azusa. Nick, are you guys not big fans of APU? Nick just spent 2 years with us over in Africa in Malawi teaching at the ABC Christian Academy, but he's recruited 8 other people to follow him to Africa. The reason I'm having these 15 people stand is because this is what I'm talking about this afternoon. One person's life can change everything. Every single person standing here today spent time in Africa and is connected to Africa because of one person. And I'm going to tell you that person's story. You guys can go ahead and sit down. But first, I wanted to tell you about 2 exciting things that happened to me while I was here at Biola. The first one was I met my wife. It's more complicated than you would think because I'm an identical twin. My twin brother and I were juniors when Laura showed up as a freshman. Palmer's girlfriend, Veronica, who he married, was also a junior, so they had been dating. After my second date, I took Laura back to her dorm. I was at Horton. I walked her back to Alpha Chi, said goodnight at the door. She goes downstairs. 4 or 5 of her friends are waiting in her room. They were going to have an intervention. They said, Laura, this Chinchen guy you're dating, he's bad news. They said, we see you sitting with him in the dining hall, and then a half an hour later, we see him up at McNally with some other girl. We see him sitting with you in chapel, and then an hour later, we see him meeting this other girl coming out of Metzger. This guy is a rotten egg. Luckily, she had already met my twin brother and knew exactly what they were talking about. The other exciting thing that happened while I was here at Biola was the end of my sophomore year, after 2 years of no one on campus seeing the Biola egg, I was able to get my hands on the Biola egg, the original Biola egg. Took it up to Horton Upper Even. We started our junior year. Everybody heard that our floor had the egg, and every floor on campus was trying to get it, especially our nemesis over at Emerson. They had a group. They were called the Omega Men. Their leader was a guy named Dave Rothy. Unfortunately, neither Dave Rothy or any of his friends knew much Greek, or they would have known that they named themselves the Last Men, Omega Men, the N men we used to call them. And so they were always trying to storm our floor to get the egg. They weren't successful. Well, one afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm sitting at my desk studying, and I hear this scraping on the ceiling. I'm listening for a while, scrape, and this sounds like a drill. Zzz, I'm going, good grief, somebody's drilling through my ceiling. So I go get some of my friends. I said, come listen to this. Well, you can hear it in the light fixture. Zzz. So we go, somebody's up there drilling in your ceiling, Chinchen. So we take a chair. There's a little, we're up on the second floor. There's an attic above us. There's a hole right outside of our door. We lift it up. We look up there. There's the leader of the Omega Men from Emerson, Dave Rothy, like he's Tom Cruise from Mission Impossible. Up in that, this was before smartphones. He's got a big old tape recorder with cassette tapes and a microphone. He's trying to put it in my light fixture so I can find out where we're keeping the egg. Going, Dave Rothy, you're a nut. So we start telling him, get out of the ceiling. Well, he's afraid. Now, this was a big, stocky, thick guy. He was on the wrestling team at Biola, but still, there are a lot of us. He was afraid to come down. So then my friend in the room next to me, Bill Alsop, he said, you know what? Rothy's scared to death of my snake. I said, you got a snake? Yeah. Bill Alsop had a boa constrictor in a glass box under his bed on our floor. So he went and got the boa constrictor, the python, put its head up in the attic and said, Rothy, you come down or I'm putting the snake up there. Rothy starts screaming like a little girl, jumps down and runs out of the dorm. But Musha, when she was introducing me, she said that my family has spent 25 years in Africa, in Malawi, Uganda, and in Liberia. We've been very fortunate to be in Africa during a time, really one of the most exciting times in the history of Christianity in Africa. There's no other place in all the history of the world where more people are coming to Christ every year than on the continent of Africa today. Our numbers in the West are going down. You may have heard this. If you were to take Europe and America and you combine them, our numbers are decreasing every day by 7,000 people. But in Africa, every single day, there's 26,000 new people coming to Christ every single day. 26,000 new Christians. But don't think this isn't coming without a real battle. There's a battle going on today for Africa. You see glimpses of this battle when you hear about ISIS. That used to mean Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Now they've shortened it to just IS because they're no longer just in Iraq and Syria. They're also in Libya, which is in Africa. When you see online those videos of the guys in the orange jumpers getting beheaded on the beaches of Libya, that's ISIS in Africa. When you hear stories about Al-Shabaab attacking malls in Nairobi, Kenya, it was a Westgate Mall, 2013, you get a glimpse of what's happening in Africa. Our family was there in July of 2013. Our whole family was in Nairobi. We're in the Westgate Mall. 3 weeks later, Al-Shabaab attacked it, killed over 50 people, and held hostage everybody in the mall for over 3 or 4 days. When you hear stories about Boko Haram in Nigeria, Boko Haram means, the meaning of that word is, Western education is a sin. And so their job is to wipe out Western education in Nigeria. You may have heard a story 11 months ago, less than a year ago, they attacked a girls' school, took 250 girls hostage and took them out into the bush to be wives for the soldiers that are fighting for Boko Haram. The same thing was happening in Uganda. Our family lived there 2004, 2005. 10 years ago was at the height of the LRA rebellion in Uganda. Some of you may have seen the video called Invisible Children. And while we were there, this was before the movie Invisible Children was made, before anyone had heard about Joseph Kony in America, our kids were attending a school called ISU, International School of Uganda. Annabelle was in 7th grade at the time. And they had an assembly one day. They said, we want everybody at the school, please invite your parents, we want you to hear a story. And there were 2 French nuns from a girls' Catholic school in northern Uganda up near the town of Lira. They had come to our school to speak. The 2 French nuns stood there, and then they brought in 12 high school girls. They said, we want you to see all 12 of these girls because for every girl you see, there's one girl missing. And then they went on to tell the rest of the story. They said in the middle of the night, their girls' boarding school in northern Uganda was attacked. And the LRA rebels took 24 girls to be wives and to be girlfriends for the soldiers that were fighting for the LRA. And so the 2 nuns, these 2 French nuns, were bold enough to follow the soldiers as they went off into the bush and follow the 24 girls that they had abducted. They walked all night. The next morning they reached the camp and they started demanding that the LRA soldiers release their 24 girls so they could take them back to school. The LRA soldiers thought that they were crazy. They said, we're not giving you these girls back. Y'all need to go. We're going to kill you. They stood there and begged them. Finally, the soldiers told them, they said, okay, we're going to compromise. They said, we're going to give you 12 of these girls. You can pick 12 and we'll keep 12. The 2 nuns said, we're not going to do that. Who wants to do something as cruel as that? Pick 12 girls. They said, well, your other choice is we'll shoot you and we'll keep all 24 girls. So now these 2 nuns had to make the most difficult decision any human being could make on this life, in their whole life, to take 12 of those girls back and to leave 12 of them there to be wives and girlfriends for the soldiers that were fighting in the LRA. So you get a glimpse of the battle that we're fighting in Africa when you hear these stories. But the important thing is, in Africa, it's different than most parts of the world. It's not like in France where they're turning churches and cathedrals into bars. In Africa, we're winning that battle. Christianity in Africa is booming. As I said, 27,000 new Christians every single day. In Africa, there's 1 billion people. Everybody knows there's 1 billion people in China. Everybody knows there's 1 billion people in India. Not very many people know that there's 1 billion people in Africa. Half of them, almost 500,000 of them, are born-again Christians in Africa. They are saying that the next center for Christianity in the whole world is going to be Africa. So we're there at a very special time. I have a good friend of mine. His name is Henry Krommendon. He's been to our campus in Malawi to speak a number of times. He's a Dutch college professor that teaches at Covenant College in Tennessee. But I met up with him once in Kampala, Uganda. And in Uganda, it's not uncommon to find a church that has 3,000 people on Sunday morning, 4,000 people, 5,000 people on Sunday morning. But when I met Henry Krommendon, it was on a Tuesday or Wednesday, middle of the week, he was so excited. He said, Paul, he said, you won't believe it. He said, last Sunday, I preached to 7,000 people on Sunday morning. I said, man, Henry, I didn't know that there was a church in Uganda that could hold 7,000. He said, no. He said, they had 4 services. I had to preach 4 times. He said, but before I started preaching, he said, the pastor pulled me aside and he started begging me. He said, Dr. Krommendon, he said, I beg you, please make sure you preach the same sermon in all 4 services. Because if people start hearing that you're preaching different sermons, nobody's going to go home. We're not going to be able to fit the next group of people in here. 7,000 people in one Sunday. But this afternoon, I wanted to tell you the story about the difference that one person can make. One life can change everything. This is how God works. Go back and look through the whole Bible. God doesn't receive any glory when some massive army goes and wins a war. God receives glory when David wins a battle for him, one person. God receives the glory when Gideon wins a battle for him. God receives the glory when Esther by herself saves all of Israel. One person can make a huge difference. And so this afternoon, I could tell you the stories of all the things that my family and our mission have been involved in, all the exciting things that have been happening at African Bible colleges over the last 25 years. I could tell you about the huge difference that our ABC graduates are making, just like your Biola graduates. I could tell you the story of Davis and Chifungo, When he graduated, he left to be the first missionary to a communist country called Mozambique. He was there for 5 years before they called him back to be the head of the largest Christian denomination in Malawi. The CCAP has over 2 million members. I could tell you the story of Diana Katola. Graduated from our college 2 years later, started a girls' school that now has over 500 girls in her school. I could tell you the story of Tia Twinimunjuni, who, when she left ABC, went to a village. She's a school teacher. Started taking young girls that were finishing high school and helping them pass a national exam so that they could get into university. I could tell you the story about Henry Joseph, who's one of your keynote speakers here, who came on a mission trip to help build our mission hospital in Africa, was so called during his 2-week trip there that he brought his family back and stayed for 7 years. I could tell you the story of our radio ministry. We have 4 Christian radio stations in Africa that preaches the gospel of Christ to villages around Africa where people have never heard the name Jesus Christ. I could tell you the story of my 10-year-old son's best friend. His name is Zobran, and his sister Myra, who attend our ABC Christian Academy in Malawi. Zobran and his sister Myra are from a Muslim family, a long line of Muslims, and 2 little boys and girls that would go home after a day at school and ask their father, who had grown up a Muslim, to help them memorize their Bible verses so they could say them at school. And then they started begging their father, Ashraf, please come to church with us. The first time Ashraf ever stepped into a church was at the ABC Mission, at our church service there. I could tell you all of those stories, but I'm not, because all of those stories would not exist if it wasn't for one person. If it wasn't for one person who was obedient to God's calling, who was fully committed to the cause of Christ. And that person's story, it begins in a small town in Texas, Tyler, Texas, 1874. Her name was Eliza Davis. She was born just 15 years after the end of the Civil War. She was one of 11 children. Both of her parents, her mother and her father, were slaves before the Civil War. She said her mother used to tell her brothers and sisters when she was growing up, her mother would tell them stories about being sold on a slave block. She told Eliza Davis, she said, Eliza, you can't imagine the horror and the fear of standing there and having people gawk at you, the humiliation and the tremendous, terrifying fear of who is going to own you next and what are they going to do to you. She said, Eliza, you can't imagine what that's like. Eliza Davis was the first of her 11 brothers and sisters to finish high school and go to college. She then became a school teacher and later was working at a teacher's training college called Central Texas College. It was while she was there in her early 30s, she was at a prayer meeting. It was at night. And the pastor liked to pray for countries around the world. And Eliza George was there praying, and as the pastor prayed for different countries, he started to pray for the people in Africa. Eliza George was an African American. And all of a sudden, she said she could feel this tremendous weight and burden for the people in Africa. And she said, as she sat there with her eyes closed, she said she could imagine Christ sitting at his throne on Judgment Day. And she could imagine Africans, and she said, I could see it like it was actually happening. She said, with my eyes closed, I could see these Africans going by the throne of Christ, and they're saying to him, but no one ever told us that you died for us. No one ever told us that you died for us. So while she was sitting there that night, she made up her mind, I'm going to Africa to be a missionary. The first people that she wrote was the Southern Baptist Mission Board in Texas. She asked them to send her out as a missionary. She needed a letter from them so she could get support from churches. She was surprised by their response, not because they didn't write her back, but because the head person of the Texas Baptist Convention came to see her in person. They said, Eliza George, we have a small problem. We don't send African Americans to be missionaries anywhere, let alone to Africa. They said, if you want to be a missionary to Africans, you can do that right here in Texas. There's a lot of your people here that you can be a missionary to. And she said, but God is calling me to go to Africa. He said, I'm sorry, but we don't send African Americans to be missionaries. He said, I'm going to have to stand between you and the churches that would support you. This was her response, his response to her. So she said back to him, she said, but I'm sorry, you can't stand between me and God. And so she wrote a second Baptist convention called the National Baptist Convention. This was an African-American Baptist convention. And they read her letter, and then they invited her to come stand in front of them. And I'll read to you part of what she said to them that evening. She actually was reading her notes that night as she met with the National Baptist Convention. She said, "While we Africans were brought here to America seemingly for our harm, but God has used it for good. We have come to know Jesus Christ and are no longer bound in chains of witchcraft and darkness. Just as Moses returned to his own people, so I believe God wants me to go back and share with my lost brethren in Africa." So in 1914, Eliza Davis went to Africa. She was later married and was called Eliza Davis George. One of the greatest hardships that she faced when she reached Liberia was that she couldn't receive funding from her mission organization. The funding would go to a bank in Monrovia, and her mission station was 200 miles down the coast in a small town called Greenville. And so she would write the bank, and sometimes a bank would send it by boat down the coast. But one time she received a letter from her home church. They said, "We have sent you through your bank a large gift of $200. So she waited for that gift to come from the bank in Monrovia by boat. It never did, and so she would write the bank, "Please send me my money." They never sent it. So she decided she was going to have to walk 200 miles to go collect her $200. She took with her a big, strong, young African man named Otto Klebo. I knew Otto Klebo, and he sounds like a huge guy, and he was. His son Thomas was a good friend of mine. We played on the same soccer team. My twin brother Palmer and I had a soccer team called PPT. It met Paul and Palmer's team. And me and Thomas Klebo played in the back. I was on the right side, he was left-footed, he played on the left. We were called the Iron Gate. But his father, Otto Klebo, gave us a great saying that we were able to use when we were playing soccer. His father, Otto, had never seen very many cars, and when my dad brought the first four-wheel drive Land Cruiser Jeep to the mission station, Otto Klebo was one of the first people to jump on the back bumper to go for a ride. And he had never ridden on a car before, and he's holding on to the railing at the top, and he's standing on the back bumper, and there's some of his buddies standing back there, and my dad's going down the airfield showing them how fast a vehicle can go. He's doing about 50. Otto Klebo is passing his house, and he's thinking, well, I don't want to walk all the way back here, I better get off. He stepped off the back of that bumper going 45 or 50 miles an hour. It didn't end well. He flipped over, hit his head on the bumper, big cloud of dust. My dad stops the car. He jumps up, this big, huge African guy, and he yells, "My head, my toe," and he goes running off into the bush. So as kids playing soccer, when you got injured, we didn't roll around like Messi or these guys do. We'd jump up, my head, my toe, and then you keep playing. But Otto Klebo is one of the two men that walked Mother George 200 miles to Monrovia. All they took with them was a wheelbarrow. Sometimes she would walk, sometimes he would push her in the wheelbarrow, and when they crossed rivers and swamps, Otto Klebo would put Mother George, Eliza Davis, on his back and carry her through the swamp and across the rivers. She finally got to Monrovia. It took her almost a month to get there. The bank, unfortunately, told her, they said, "Eliza Davis, we're really sorry. We thought you had died in the bush. We never heard from you. We've sent your money back to your church in America." So she had to go 200 miles back to Greenville empty-handed. But at the first school that she started, it was a small mission school called Kelton. There was a young boy named Augustus Marwia that wanted an education. He was 14 years old. He had never worn a stitch of clothing in his life. He was from the interior, from the Sapo tribe. He had come 50 miles to the coast because he heard there was a school and he wanted to learn how to read. So he had an uncle that lived near the Kelton school, mission school that Eliza Davis had started. And he moved in with his uncle, but his uncle said, Augustus Marwia, he said, "You're not going to be able to go to school because you have to wear clothes to go to school, and I don't have any money to buy you any trousers or shirt to wear to school." He said, "You're going to have to go home," and he was going to send him back 50 miles to the Sapo rainforest where he had come from. And then his aunt said, "No, it's okay." She said, "I have one blouse, they call it a booba." And she said, "Augustus, you can wear my booba to go to school." So she gave him her white blouse. And he actually went to the headmaster of the school. His name was Newspaper George. He had adopted Mother George's last name, and he liked to read the newspaper and had no English first name, so they called him Newspaper George. He was a headmaster. And Augustus Maria said, "Is it okay if I wear my aunt's booba to school?" He had no trousers, just this thing that hung down to his knees. He said, "That's fine. As long as you're covered up, you can come to school." So the first 2 years he was in school, he would borrow his aunt's booba early in the morning. In the evening, he would fold it up and leave it in her hut. But he was a very special student. Mother George saw that he had great potential, so when he finished high school, she sent him to college in the States. He actually attended Golden Gate Seminary up in Northern California in San Francisco. He went back and started a mission station at his village in the Sapo rainforest. He named it after Eliza Davis. He called it E&I, Elizabeth Native Interior Mission. But he was looking for someone to help train pastors. So he came back to America, and this was in 1968, to recruit somebody to go with him to train pastors in his Sapo tribe in the rainforest in southern Liberia. And that's when my father was a pastor at that time in Picayune, Mississippi, a small town you've never heard of. It's about 50 miles from New Orleans. My dad was pastoring a small church that had never, ever had a missions conference. And he had heard that Augustus Maria was in America, and somebody had told him about him, and so he invited Gus Maria to preach. Now, Gus Maria was from Africa. He was used to very big crowds and no sound system. So here he was in this small little Presbyterian church that my dad was preaching in, and he would blast at these people every evening as if he had no microphone and there were 4,000 people in front of him. But also, as he would finish his talk, he would say, "Now who can go back to Liberia with me?" And when he was done speaking, my dad, as a pastor, thought it was his job to stand up and also encourage these people in Picayune, Mississippi. Who is going to go back to Liberia with Augustus Maria? And after doing this for 3 nights in a row, my mother took my father home, sat him down, and said, "Jack, how can you ask other people to do what you're not willing to do yourself?" And so they got down on their knees and prayed and said, "God, if you can use us in Liberia, we will go." And so the next morning they told Gus Maria that. They said, "We're willing to go to Liberia with you." He was so excited. In 1970, our family moved to Liberia. On that mission station, we found Mother George. She was 90 years old when we got there in 1970. I was 6 years old. I remember every evening at 5:30, they had a propane tank hanging from a mango tree next to the airfield, and they would beat on it with a metal bar at 5:30 in the evening. Somebody would walk a rattan chair out to the middle of the airfield, and Mother George would come with her cane and sit in the rattan chair, and then all of us kids would sit around her, and we would sing songs as the sun went down every single evening. But it was while we were living in the bush there, in the Sapo rainforest, that my parents had the vision for a Christian college, just like a Biola, just like a Wheaton, just like a Moody. This is what Liberia really needs. And so they were going to build African Bible colleges there in Liberia. But when they founded the mission organization, they said, "You know what? There's 54 countries in Africa. There must be other countries that need a good evangelical Christian college just like a Biola." And so they named the mission organization, even though there was only one college at the time, they named it African Bible Colleges. And so now you know the rest of the story. All of these people that stood up here today were in Africa because of what Eliza George did. Because God took one person who was willing to leave her home and to follow God fully, who was completely obedient and fully committed to the cause of Christ. One life, your life, can change everything for hundreds, for thousands of people. And so I wanted to close with just 3 things this afternoon. First of all, Christ made it our job to take the gospel to the lost. We don't want to forget that. That was the last command that Christ gave us. Go preach my gospel to all nations. That's what compelled and drove Eliza Davis to leave her home in Texas and go to Liberia. That's the example that we see in Christ. At Christmas, my daughter Annabelle gave me the book by David Platt. Maybe some of you have read it, called Follow Me. And in it, he tells a story about, well, why did God come himself to present the gospel of Christ and how to go to heaven himself? He said, because when it's a matter of the heart, you do it in person. Just imagine if when I met my wife Laura here at Biola, imagine how well this would have gone. I said to my roommate Palmer, and I also roomed with Gary Bradley and Mark Lenz. But if I called one of them up and said, hey, Gary, can you do me a favor? Can you go talk to that girl, Laura, for me? Beautiful girl in Alpha. She's on the bottom floor. Give you her room number. Ask her if she'll go out with me. That might not go so well. When it's a matter of the heart, you go in person. And it's the same with sharing the gospel of Christ, and that's what David Platt tries to explain in his book called Follow Me. We take the gospel ourselves. This is why Christ saved us. This isn't some kind of waiting room for the hereafter. We have a job to do. The second thing is, and I saw this on a t-shirt. I was at my twin brother's church, The Grove, and he had 100 people signed up to go to Uganda, Liberia, and Malawi in one summer from his church. 100 people in one summer. In that group was a 12-year-old little boy that was trying to raise money for his plane ticket. And so he had printed up t-shirts. And the t-shirt said, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And he was selling those t-shirts to make money to go on his mission trip to Africa, a 12-year-old boy. And it's true. We can't solve all the problems in this world. But that's the job that God gave us. If you go to Matthew chapter 25, where Christ says, there's going to be a time when we're going to stand in judgment. I tell my kids when they take a spelling test, why would you not get 100% on the spelling test? You were given the answers before you took the test. Why in the world can't you get 100%? There's no excuse. Well, God has told us exactly what question He's going to ask us when we stand before Him in glory. It's not just people on their way to hell and destruction that are going to be judged. Even Christians have to stand there and answer for their actions. And Christ says in Matthew 25, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Why didn't you feed me when I was hungry? Why didn't you give me clothes when I was cold? Why didn't you come and visit me when I was in prison? Why didn't you take care of me when I was sick? And the people will answer and say, oh, Christ, if we knew it was you, good gosh, I would have given you my shirt, of course. I would have given you my food. I don't need lunch at the Biola Cafe. You can have all of it. And He said, but when you do it to even the least of them, you've done it to me. A few years ago, my daughter Bess, who's sitting on the front row, was over at my sister's house. My sister has also went to Biola, and her husband, Steve and Marion Spencer. He played baseball here. I think his name's still on the gym for hitting the most home runs at Biola. They lived next door to us in Africa. And a young man from town that we've known for a long time brought his little baby to my sister's house. Her name was Chikondi, which means love. The baby had just been born. The mother died in childbirth. And he told my sister, he said, I don't have any food to feed the baby. I can't afford the formula. And so my sister said, wait here. She got little Bess and her cousin Charlotte, put them in the car, drove to the grocery store, bought some cans of baby formula and some bottled water, because the worst thing you can do in Africa is give somebody the baby formula and they go take shallow well water or take river water and mix it with the baby formula and the baby gets sick and dies. So you have to use filtered or boiled water or water that you buy in a bottle. So she brought it back. She gave it to this gentleman and she said, here, this will last you for about 3 or 4 weeks. This is enough. And so he was very, very grateful, something he couldn't afford to do for his little baby that didn't have a mother. And he left. And that's when Bess and Charlotte turned to my sister Marion and they said, well, what is he going to do next month? My sister said, I don't know. I have 8 kids to feed. And I'm not joking. My sister had 8 children. And she said, I can't keep feeding his baby as well. And so Bess and Charlotte, they went into my wife's backyard. She was growing lavender. And they started cutting the lavender. I don't know if you know about lavender. I didn't. My wife does. But it smells really nice. And you can put it in your drawers and makes your socks smell better and other things you keep in your drawers smell better. And so they took those little bundles of lavender, they tied it with a ribbon, and then they would take it around house to house to house around town and sell them $1 at a time, little bundles of ribbon. They had wrapped it in pink mosquito netting and put a pink ribbon on it. They would tell people, you can put this in your drawer. It'll make your socks and underwear smell a lot better. And they sold enough to buy some cans of formula and some bottles of water to give baby Chikondi for the next couple of months. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And then I'm going to close with this. It's an important question. What do you want to be remembered for? Look at the story of Eliza George. one person who has literally influenced the lives not just of 15 people here, but of, what's wrong? Okay. Not just these 15 people here, but thousands and thousands of people around Africa. We had one of our board members, his name is Jim Baird. He came to visit us in Liberia. And after he spoke at our college, he was driving back to the airport in Monrovia. And they stopped on the way down to Monrovia. It's about a 6-hour drive. There was a leper colony. And the lepers, to make extra money, they do little wooden carvings. And so my parents had Jim Baird in the car, and they said, why don't you buy some carvings? You can take them back to your friends in America. And it also helps these lepers. So he picked out a few carvings, but one he wanted to keep for himself. It was a map of Africa that a leper had carved with a set of praying hands on it were mounted in the map of Africa. And so he paid the leper, and he wrapped it in some newspaper, and he put it in his suitcase and flew back to Jackson, Mississippi. And when he got to his church in Mississippi, he said he went into his office and he had carried that carving from the leper. It was still in the newspaper, and he sat down on his desk and he said, this will be something nice to put on my desk. And so he unwrapped it. And as he was about to set it down, he noticed there was something engraved in the bottom of that map of Africa. And it was someone's name. It was the leper's name. It carved his name in the bottom, Isaac Dro. And it had the date that he had carved it, June 4, 1986. And Jim Baird said when he saw that, he said, it made me stop and think. Isaac Dro was very proud of what he had done that day on June 4th, 1986. He had made a nice carving of praying hands and mounted it on a map of Africa. He said, am I proud of what I've done today? Am I proud of what I've done yesterday, of what I'll do tomorrow? What do I want to be remembered for? Well, I'm going to stop there, but as I finish, I'm going to ask my twin brother. Some of you may have heard him speak yesterday. Palmer is a pastor of what I will call a model missional church in Chandler, Arizona. I mentioned that he had 100 people come to Africa in one summer. When that team came back, I flew in. They gave a presentation on a Sunday morning. They have 3 different services at the Grove in Chandler. And after their team made their presentation, those 100 people would stand up and talk about their trip. They had black chalkboards behind him. And as they would leave, my twin brother Palmer would stand up and say, if you want to go on a mission trip next year, please come put your name on the board. The black chalkboard, and there's a big tin of colored chalk. I flew in about 5 hours after the last service. My brother picked me up at the Phoenix airport. We're driving back to his house, and he said, Paul, he said, before I take you home, I've got to show you something at the church. So we walked in. The church was dark. He turned on the lights, and he said, look at the boards at the front. And I started looking at them. There were names. And he said, these are people that signed up to go on a mission trip next year. He had 100 that went out this year. I said, well, how many did you count them? He said, the boards are full. We couldn't fit any more names on it. There's 386 people signed up to go on mission trips next summer. This is a model missional church. So I was going to ask him to challenge you of how you can be used to change the world, how God can use one person to change everything before we close. Thank you, Palmer. You want to close in prayer when you're done?
Can we thank Paul for sharing his heart for Africa? And it's fantastic. And I don't know how many of you have been, but if you've ever thought about going, then please see them afterwards. And they've got all kinds of opportunities to serve in the summer or after you graduate especially. I'll just say this about the Grove in Chandler. I helped start the church. Not too many people get a chance to help start a church. And I talk about it like painting on white canvas. You get to form a church the way you always thought it could be. And from the very beginning, I told the people that started to come, I said, we're going to be a missional church. And I think the first time I really believed we were a missional church was that Sunday when on one Sunday, 386 people signed their name in colored chalk on a black wall to say, I'll go to Africa or Haiti or Cuba or Thailand. And I just want to remind you that we live on mission every day. It's something I say to the people at the Grove, that every day we live on mission. It's not a department of a church. So many churches, if you're part of a church, so many churches spend their time just feeding the church machine, and we try not to do that. We try to get our people to focus their energy and their lives outward in our neighborhoods, in our community, and then across oceans. Let me pray for you as we go. God, thank you for what you're doing at Biola this week, this year. Thank you for what you're doing in the lives of each student here. I know that you are changing them even this week, and you're preparing them for a life after you. May the things that are tugging on their heart, may they not let those things slip away, but may they grab onto that passion that you have burning in their soul, and may they go after it. I pray that your hand be on each of them here right now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.